Let's talk about freshwater systems in caravans and motorhomes. In particular, the pipes or hoses. Now, in the early days, caravans were fitted with a clear pipe. And I'll always remember my first one. Inside it started to develop all kinds of unpleasant discolorations. Apparently this was quite normal. It was to do with the nature of the plastic. The light could get through and it could cause problems with the water, create algae growth and so on. And that's why in the industry there was a changeover to darkened pipes with the obvious two colours, which then stopped the light getting through. Now, between you and I actually don't think that inside they're very much cleaner than these were, but of course you don't see it. A lot of caravans and a number of motorhomes still have this type of flexible hose. And honestly, I don't really like it as much as the other system, which I'll talk about a little bit later in part 2. I had a friend whose camper van had an ordinary submersible pump, rather like caravans do, and the flow of water was very, very disappointing. And he asked me if there was something wrong with the pump. In reality, it wasn't. It was a classic case, which is quite common, of a kink developing in the pipe, or should I say hose, because that's the important difference here. Now, the DIY classic way of dealing with this is to get a hose clip, to put it onto the position where the kink has developed, to tighten up the clip, to compress it, and the theory there is that it straightens it up and reforms it. Maybe, but I've never had a great deal of success long term with that quick fix cure. Much better to replace the hose completely. And this is where it's important to use good hose quality clips. I mean, the original people who invented these were known as Jubilee, and so we still call them Jubilee clips, even though there are many other manufacturers. But get a good quality one. And then a couple of tips on how to make a joint using a clip and a hose. I think this clip from the bottom of my toolbox must be an old one, because it's tightened just with a flat-bladed screwdriver. Some of the more recent ones have a configuration on the top which allows you to use either this or a crosshead screwdriver. But the point I'd like to make is that they're often very stiff when you take them out of the packet. So tip number 1 is to make sure that you just pop a little bit of oil down into the bearing surfaces. Light cycle oil is fine. Now, the other thing to bear in mind is that this is very, very solid in the winter. Whenever it's cold, it's pretty rigid. And the one thing you don't want is rigidity, because you want this compressing clip to be able to pull it in tightly into the coupling that's receiving it. For example, here, I wanted to make a coupling onto this item. And that meant the need to really tighten this in to the collar itself. Okay. Now, you may have thought that I'm simply going to have a cup of coffee. Wrong. This is boiling water. Making sure you don't scald yourself, place the end of the pipe into the boiling water. Leave it just a few moments. There we go. You'd be amazed. Now it's as flexible as anything. Whereas the other end, which hasn't been heated, is still, I promise you, I'm trying quite hard. No, it's still very solid. So do that, especially if you're working outdoors and particularly if it's in the winter. And then when you tighten this, you'll find that it really does compress the plastic. But before we move on to part 2, I'm going to point out that I really don't think this type of hose is the best form of delivering water to a caravan or motorhome, because it can kink, the joints can fail, and there is a much better product called push-fit pipe as opposed to flexible hose. On a number of the caravans I've owned, I've upgraded the water system by replacing the hose with proper push-fit pipe. Trouble is, you can't always reach it in all the places, and therefore you can sometimes only replace parts of the pipe run. But that's not difficult, because you can produce a little coupling here which is using hose on one end. On this end it was a coupling to a pump, but on the other end I've got a push-fit connector that is used for the push-fit pipe. So part of the system could remain hose. I would have liked to have changed it, but you just couldn't get to it. The rest of it was in this semi-flexible pipe, and that is what I'm going to talk about next.